Hi, I'm John Hanley. I'm the managing partner of Triton Leadership Coaching and the creator of the Mindset Mastery Process. I'll be your host and facilitator. And I first of all want to welcome you to this journey and congratulate you on taking this step for your life and for the success of your business. Now, this first section, we're going to go through somewhat of an overview and an orientation about where we're going and what we're up to. Now, I'm going to begin by sharing my screen in a moment, because one way of describing what we're up to is that we want to get you off of what we call the conventional success spectrum. The conventional success spectrum is a predictable pattern that we've identified that most entrepreneurs end up following and find themselves at some point on this spectrum along the way of their business journey. So since we want to get you off of this spectrum, let's first of all understand what it is and how it works. So I'm going to pull up this chart now and get it to full screen. So bear with me for a moment. Okay. So let's start from the bottom of this chart and move our way up. You see that this conventional success spectrum begins in all times and all places and all people with the stage of being hopeful. And sure enough, when we start any new venture, we're hopeful. We're hopeful it's going to be a grand success. It's going to fulfill our wildest dreams. It'll manifest itself in the external world according to our intention. And also, I think we're hopeful that by achieving this success that we desire, that we'll also experience some kind of internal state of, let's call it, fulfillment. Now, from that hopeful place, we get started. And that moves us into the grinding phase or the grinding stage. And grinding is all about putting the pieces in place so that the business can start to take off. And that can be everything from a business plan to all kinds of infrastructure issues, personnel, promotion, day-to-day work, day after day after day, blood, sweat, and tears, so to speak. So we grind away, and depending on the business, there's some length of grace period where we're not expecting total victory. So we give ourselves a chance to put the pieces in place, get things together, so to speak. And whether that's a few months or a year or two, at some point, we then branch off into one of two directions. So let's follow the struggling and the bottoming out track, first of all. I believe that most entrepreneurs end up going this direction. For one thing, life is hard and business is hard. It's a challenge. If it were easy, everybody would start their own business, everybody would do their own thing, and everybody would be successful. Of course, that's not the way it works. There's heavy competition. There's all kinds of ways things can go wrong, things can go off course. Another reason that I think people end up in this struggling and eventually bottoming out track is because of where they're starting from. Even the idea of being hopeful while in one sense is innocent, in a deeper sense, it speaks to something that uh, is very significant and can already sow the seeds of eventual failure. You'll remember that I said in our typical hopeful state that we're hopeful for the result to turn out by our standards, but we're also hopeful that by having that result turn out, that we will experience some kind of internal state, which I'll call fulfillment. There's something about that hope for eventual internal fulfillment that sows the seeds for probable failure. We'll get into that a little bit further as we go on. Now, when you get to the struggling phase, what that signifies is that you're starting to realize things are tougher than you thought. Things are not moving smoothly. The challenges are mounting. You're starting to get worried. You're starting to lose faith. Getting up and putting the effort becomes a bit more difficult as each day passes. You put enough of those days together in a row, you eventually reach what we call bottoming out. And bottoming out can manifest itself in one of two ways. One is that you keep the business going, kind of limping ahead, but your heart isn't in it anymore. You've lost your enthusiasm, and to some extent, you're going through the motions. The other version of bottoming out is more straightforward, where you give up, you quit. Now, we all probably recognize that pathway all too well, at least conceptually. And for some of us, we've experienced it at least once and maybe many times in our lives. And we certainly know that that's always a possibility when we begin a new business venture. Now, let's take the other road for a moment, or imagine following the other track. So from this grinding phase, sometimes things start working, things start building momentum. People are happy with your product or your service. You start to get some buzz. Maybe it's right time, right place. But however it happens, it starts to build upon itself, and it starts to kind of take a momentum of its own. And that's a very exciting period. It's kind of a relief in a way that you got to that place of momentum and you start to taste success. And that follows for a few months, or again, a year or two. And this could be a little bit more nebulous in terms of the timeline than the struggling and the bottoming out version. Maybe it's several years. But eventually, most people on this momentum track reach a stage of what we call topping out. And that's where you've reached a certain level of standard success. And yet, that fulfillment that you were hoping for and that you, to some extent, been chasing, has proven to be elusive. And the topping out represents a sort of deep disappointment that you experience within yourself. I worked so hard. I had such hopes that this would be meaningful for me. And then I'm still not fulfilled. I'm still not satisfied. I still feel empty inside to some degree. So that's topping out. Now you might say, I'll take it. Of course, it's preferable to bottoming out in some sense. But there's many people that get there and they find themselves actually quite despondent and even to some extent depressed. And what do you do about this topping out stage? Well, some people just remain with it and they just are kind of stuck with it. And they have this low grade depression that they just sit with. Now, other people, they have the great idea to start a new venture. So at least then they can let go of this disappointment and start all over again and work on the next venture and hopefully start building momentum and enjoy that excitement of the momentum. And then worry about the inevitable next topping out later, which eventually does come. And then start a new venture. And some people just continue this cycle. But always there's the underlying sense of something's missing. No matter what I manifest in the external world, I experience an emptiness within myself. Now, this is part and parcel of the conventional success spectrum. And I'm here to tell you this is not the only game in town. You do not have to resign yourself to being in this flow and these eventual outcomes. You can create a new possibility. You can come from a different place. And you can follow a different path. So now let's look at the alternative, just so we can contrast and get a sense of what's possible through mindset mastery. So I'm going to stop sharing this chart and I'm going to pull up our other chart, which represents a new mindset, a new model. And I'm going to put this full screen. Here we go. So this is what we call the abundant success model. Now you'll notice here that it's a different shape altogether. And it represents a more cyclical approach. And you notice that in the center of this model is what we call a centered mindset. Now we're going to elaborate that more in a few minutes. But let's just take it as a given that you create a centered mindset, however mysterious that may be at this moment. From this centered mindset, imagine that that hopefulness for eventual fulfillment is done away with. And it's something like beginning from already being fulfilled. That's the shorthand version of a centered mindset. Starting from, coming from a place of fulfillment. You bring forth your vision. You stand in the light of your vision. You allow yourself to be called forth into the world. And you begin a process of manifesting the concept of that vision into the everyday world of agreement. And that manifestation continues until you reach a state of completion. And I say that with some reservations, because it's not like it has to end necessarily. But when I say completion, I am representing that you've achieved the dream of your vision. Of course, it could keep expanding, it could keep growing, but at least your original dream for your vision has been manifested. And so that's a time to come to completion on that phase of your business. Now, you may have achieved 100% of what you desired. It may be 90%, it may be 70%, it may be 50%. Whatever it is, you accept it. You come to a place of acceptance about what has been achieved up till now. And you realize this is the end of this road, so to speak. From the beginning of the vision through the manifestation, it reached a state of completion. And then you accept what has been created, and you accept what hasn't been created as well. Now, this acceptance is it's very important. And a lot of people underestimate the importance of acceptance, because a lot of people spend a lot of their life resisting the results they've created. It should be some different way. They fight against and push against what is. And this resistance creates a kind of inertia, because what you resist tends to persist. But when you create a sense of acceptance, this creates space, this creates openness. Now there's no resistance, there's no fighting against what is. It somehow puts you into the question, what's next? And so then, new vision, manifest, complete, accept, and on to a new vision. All coming from that who you are is inherently whole and complete, nothing missing. From that deep, powerful, confident come from, it eliminates the sense of grinding and struggling, and even it eliminates topping out. Now, all of this isn't to say that you won't have to work hard. Of course, there's still going to be long hours and challenging days. And it also doesn't mean that you're for sure going to guarantee success. But what this model does ensure is a kind of an internal experience of joy, fulfillment, satisfaction, aliveness, vitality, full self-expression. And that in and of itself is priceless. And then I would also argue that coming from that kind of a internal centeredness is going to make the project of manifesting your dream that much easier. When you're coming from a non-centered mindset, what we call a fragile mindset, you're more or less self-sabotaging your efforts before you even begin and through every stage of the process. All right. So now I'm going to stop sharing this, and I'm going to bring up an outline of what else I want to talk with you about today. Full screen. Okay. So I've kind of jumped around this a little bit by showing you those two charts, but let's come to this piece about the underlying presence of a fragile mindset. I'm saying that a fragile mindset is at the heart of the conventional success spectrum. And it's going to produce those predictable stages along the way and the high probability of predictable failure. Now, how do you know you're in a fragile mindset? Because there's going to be an element of defensiveness and reactivity and insecurity. Now, those aren't words that most of us want to associate with ourselves, and it might or might not immediately resonate with you. I invite you to look underneath the surface a little bit and see if you can recognize some of those internal experiences in your business career or your business ventures up till now. When I say defensiveness, I mean this kind of being on edge a little bit and sort of feeling as though I do need to automatically defend myself, whether it's defend my accomplishments or even somehow defend my mistakes and defend my failures. There's a in a sense, although it can come across as brash and bravado, underneath it, there's this kind of insecurity that's going on. I feel I must defend what I've created for better or for worse, because I don't feel confident about myself, in terms of my own self-concept. So this defensiveness can be subtle and kind of indirect, and it can also be very clear and evident. And it shows up in what I call reactivity, where you may notice you have certain automatic reactions to what the world throws you. People say something, they have some tone to their voice, they're giving you bad news maybe, and you have a reactivity to that. You get some report, some economic news, and it strikes you in a predictable way. You respond in a predictable way, or not really even respond, it's more react. And it's kind of unconscious reaction. And these reactions can show up like feeling fearful, feeling depressed, feeling upset, angry. So this fragile mindset is, it's not just just a mysterious, vague concept. It manifests itself in your everyday experience, in your everyday way of being in the world. And I'm sure there's more ways of describing it than defensive, reactive, and insecure, but those will do for a start. Now, I've already touched on this to some extent, but the driver of this defensiveness and this reactivity and this insecurity and really this fragility is this foundational belief of I'm not okay. There's something wrong with me. There's something missing about me. There's something insufficient about who I am. Now we're going to look at that very carefully because that goes back a long ways and it's very embedded in our internal programming of our personality. And you could see it's a powerful foundation. Powerful in the sense that it's going to have a lot of influence on what you build on top of that. And pretty much whatever you try to build on top of I'm not okay is going to be is going to crumble. It's going to be very fragile because the foundation is fragile itself. Now, in this fragile mindset, the underlying purpose of life becomes hiding this not okayness, this insufficiency, this self-insufficiency from yourself and the world, and or trying to prove or fix it, trying to prove that it's not true and trying to fix this not okayness. And we usually do that through achievement. We hope that by achieving certain symbols of success, that will solve this underlying sense of insufficiency. And so we infuse these strategies into the way we conduct ourselves as entrepreneurs and in every aspect of our business. So this is going to show up in terms of how you interact with people, what you say, what you don't say, how you say what you say, how you listen what others say. It's kind of the background context in which you operate as a business person. And as such, I would argue that your mindset is actually the most significant, most influential piece and driver of your business results and your experience along the way and at the completion. So your mindset is pretty much going to predict the type of actions you take and therefore the type of results you produce. And it's also going to predict the type of internal experience you have along the way. Now, we're inviting you, as we mentioned, to move toward an abundant success model, which we went through before. And I mentioned that this centered mindset, we would talk more about it. So now we're going to do that. So the centered mindset is illustrated by a sense of personal power, serenity, and endless passion. So that's in direct contrast to what we saw in the fragile mindset, where you're illustrated by defensiveness, reactivity, and insecurity. Replace that defensiveness and reactivity and insecurity with personal power and serenity and endless passion, and you have a recipe for a whole different experience of life in business and a whole different trajectory of what's possible. Now, this personal power, it comes from this second piece, which we call this foundational belief that I am not my ego self. The fragile mindset is built on I'm not okay. From the centered mindset, in some sense, we have to undercut this typical traditional I, if you will, this ego self. See, the ego self, by its very nature, is fragile. The ego self is built to survive, that is to say, to not die. We'll talk more about that in future sections together. Now, if I'm not my ego self from a centered mindset, who am I? Now, that's a very deep and powerful question, which I'm only going to be able to touch on right now. I want you to consider that although you have an ego self, that who you truly are is the space in which that ego self can show up. And this space of possibility that I consider to be your true self is a phenomenon that couldn't possibly be insufficient. It couldn't possibly be missing anything, and it couldn't possibly be needing anything. We're going to leave that there for now. That's a very deep exploration, but very powerful and very necessary. Now, when you open up this access to your true self, you shift your underlying purpose of life. From the fragile mindset, your purpose is always to kind of hide your insufficiency or try to fix it, try to compensate for it. From a centered mindset, your purpose is full participation, full engagement in the game of life. Rather than spending most of your life trying to avoid discomfort, or if you're in discomfort, trying to get out of it, you create a new priority: full participation. And within the priority of full participation, it's not as though you seek out discomfort necessarily, but you also embrace it. You're certainly not afraid of it. And it's a come from, this is it, right here, right now. Not someday, not eventually, not when I feel better about myself, not when I put together my circumstances in the way that the world tells me I need to put them together. This is it right here, right now. This is a complete reorganization of what's important to you. Now, this is massively critical to how you're going to operate in your business and business success. Now, you might say, well, doesn't every entrepreneur fully participate in their job? I would say no. Now, there's a difference between being busy and being what I call fully participating. There's an energetic component to full participation. There's a vulnerability. There's a passion. There's an aliveness, a vitality, a surrender, a letting go. You get what I'm going toward here? Get what I'm getting at? It's more than just being busy. It's more than working hard. And unfortunately, from the fragile mindset, although people do work hard, they also waste a lot of time. They waste a lot of energy. All that defensiveness and insecurity and reactivity is very draining and takes up quite a bit of time. Now, just as a fragile mindset infused into your business is a recipe for disaster, when you infuse a centered mindset into your business, this is a recipe for a powerful new possibility of being. From a centered mindset, you're going to think differently. You're going to perceive others differently. You'll listen differently. You'll judge opportunities differently. I won't say you'll be fearless, but you'll be courageous in the face of fear. And that's going to make all the difference in struggling and bottoming out or topping out versus fulfillment, success and fulfillment. See, I want you to have it all. I want you to have all the money you want. I want you to have all the external success you're looking for and validation. Not that you need it, but it's fun. But as importantly, I want you to have that internal sense of fulfillment and deep sense of living a meaningful life that you're proud of. And again, I'm not talking about reaching that meaningful life someday. I'm talking about coming from that place right now and every day. Now, how do you make this shift from the fragile to the centered mindset? Let's touch on some of this in the time we have remaining. First of all, you need to see through the illusions that perpetuate the fragile mindset. The fragile mindset is not just sort of randomly put together. It's held in place by certain beliefs or premises or assumptions. One of the huge assumptions holding the fragile mindset in place, I'll just go to the last one because we've already talked about it, this idea that who you are is your ego self. As you'll see, there's a big difference between having an ego self and being your ego self. Those are different. Now, when you see through the illusion of what the ego self is and what it isn't, then you have the chance to have it rather than it having you. Now, the other three on top of that are, in a way, getting at the same phenomena. External results cause your internal experience. The world is doing it to you, hoping for a future reality that will bring you self-value. So all of this is speaking to a kind of, you might say, a victim mentality or approach to life. Now, this is very embedded into our everyday way of thinking and being in the world. And I would argue that the 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 the, the outside world, uh, the discourse of the public world reinforces and perpetuates this victim mindset all the time. And chances are you've fallen prey to this like most everybody else. And it shows up in subtle ways. So, as I've alluded to, we, of course, have experiences from time to time in life that are not really that pleasant, whether it's sadness or anger or fear. But the automatic tendency from the fragile mindset is to believe that something in the external world is causing that internal state within myself. Now, that's a powerful and devastating belief, because you're essentially telling yourself every day, all the time, that you're not creating your own internal reality. You're merely at the effect of what the world is doing to you. Hopefully you can see that that is devastating, and indeed it makes you fragile, and it's going to make your business fragile if that's where you're coming from. Now, the second thing in terms of how to make the shift from a fragile to a centered mindset. So first of all, we say you got to see through some of these illusions. We're going to go into those much more in depth in the coming weeks. But the second thing is, once you start to see some of your fragile mindset patterns, you need to come to a place of acceptance about it and realize that these patterns that have been programmed into you from a young age, they're not going to just disappear, but you can create a relationship with your patterns such that you're not at the effect of them. You can kind of witness them, notice them, experience them, sort of be with them, but you're a little bit one step removed from them, and therefore you're able to stop, look, and ask yourself, okay, do I want to act in alignment with these automatic historical patterns, or do I want to make a new conscious choice right now? You only get to that place of personal choice and personal power if you allow yourself to, first of all, recognize your patterns, but also accept them. And we'll work on this over the coming weeks. When you see, because at some point you get to the place, if you do the work, where you do understand the programming, and you sort of see your predictable patterns. But then the tendency is, I just want to push them away. I just want to get rid of them. I'm frustrated by them. I don't like those. Those are the enemy. But then that kind of puts you back in the fragile mindset in a way where you're trying to fix something that you consider broken. But then it only reinforces the premise that you're starting with. So we're going to get to a place where we recognize the patterns, we accept them, if you will, even in a way, I'm going to invite you to love them, which is, in a sense, loving your ego self, not resisting it, non-resistance, but seeing it for what it is. It's not the only option. It's not the absolute truth of, the only possibility for life. And from that place, new choices will be available to you. Okay. Just checking my time. I think that's a good place to end for now. So this is, as you can see, quite a lot of work we have ahead of ourselves, but it's very exciting work and it pays off. It pays off in not only your internal happiness and fulfillment and sense of satisfaction, but also in terms of your ability to produce extraordinary results. And that's what we all want, right? Well, we want it all. We want the internal peace and the external success. And you can do it from mindset mastery, from a centered mindset. So we'll leave it there for now, and we'll see you next time. Take care.